This isn't technically a skin. This is just like Yasuo as a wind fishing, fly fishing. So I'm just actually staying closer to base Yasuo. Yeah, this is weekend Yasuo. This is canon. This is canon. This is what Yasuo does when he's not fighting. Welcome to Riot Games Super Art Power Hour. I'm Jason Chan, a visual development artist on the long-form animation team, working on animation for film and TV, such as Arcane. I've been at Riot for a long time. I was one of the original Splash team members. So I've done splashes like Base, Misfortune, Riven, Morgana, Caitlyn, Tryndamere, Rengar, a lot of the originals. KDA Gragas. Probably my favorite splash was Captain Fortune. I recently did some concepts for Arcane Season 2, such as Jinx's final form and Caitlyn and Vi's final outfits as well in the finale arcs. I was lucky enough to contribute artwork for an overnumber card for Riftbound. There are certain Riftbound cards there are alternate arts for, done by artists around Riot in their own personal style, so it's not necessarily Splash style or even a League-related style. These cards will be pretty rare, and they'll be treated in a really special way with lots of textures and finishes that'll make them very premium. Today I'm going to take you through the process I go through to design artwork for a trading card game, specifically for Riftbound. I'll get my brief, and from the brief I can gather reference. I will use that reference to do possibly a few sketches for different options, and from there take the sketch to a more polished stage. We'll see how much time I have. I'll try to take you through all the steps. Usually this is a longer process. I'll spend a week or two for trading card artwork. Today we'll try to do the artwork in about an hour. That being said, this is totally a hypothetical card, and it's just for the purpose of walking you through the steps I go through to create artwork, and it won't ever be shipped as an official card. All right, so to get our creative brief, just like usual, I pull it out of a hat. Let's see. Windfisher Yasuo. So like fly fishing Yasuo. All right, I think there's something I can do with that. Yasuo being a wind fisher makes total sense, as he can create wind walls or cyclones and just knock all the fish out of the water anyway. So this is completely lore accurate for him to be able to fish with the wind. First step when I get my brief or my subject is I gather reference to inspire me and also for me to kind of go back to for maybe details or ideas and kind of draw from to create the artwork. When I hear, wind fisher, Yasuo, or like a fly fisher, I'm trying to find, what would make an interesting piece of artwork or an interesting design for this version of Yasuo. How can I marry the fisherman, the samurai, and the wind? The most obvious thing is like going from a samurai sword to a fishing pole. So trying to find references where there's kind of an overlap on how a fishing pole and like a katana feel. So I'm looking for stuff like that. I'm looking for iconic fishing outfit things like the hat with the hooks on it, or like some waders or things like that. And then also for posing, I'm looking for both fishing poses and sword fighting poses, trying to kind of digest all that to see where I can find something that kind of melds the two together. I will usually have this reference. It's just a way to put the ideas somewhere I can look at it and be inspired from. If you have a very specific pose you're looking for and you can't find it on the internet, there's also merit to taking your own photos, and you can have your own unique reference that no one else has to make sure you're not painting the exact same thing someone else is painting. I'll be using Photoshop today. There's a variety of digital illustration programs that you can use. Personally, I just like to use Photoshop. I'll be working on a Wacom Cintiq, and I also have this Razer Tartarus keypad that I use to program a lot of my keyboard shortcuts. Right from the beginning on a trading card, you're going to have a template. So here I actually have a Yasuo Riftbound card template that gives me where all of the card UI is and all of the crop marks and bleed areas on the card so that I know where those will be when the card is printed and I can work around them when I'm composing the illustration. I'll usually hide a lot of it while I'm working, but it's good to keep an idea of where it'll be and how it'll affect the composition. So the first thing I'm gonna do is try to scribble out like a really rough idea of the composition I'm thinking of. This is the sketch phase. It's gonna be a bit messy, but it's where I'll figure out how I want the card to be laid out. And this is usually what I'll communicate to team members to give them an idea of what I'm thinking for the card. So if I'm doing an illustration of Yasuo, there's a number of things I want to consider to keep him consistent with other depictions of Yasuo. Definitely his fantasy of being this kind of wind samurai type archetype. So trying to find a way to highlight that. There's also things about his silhouette that we usually want to preserve, like his big bushy ponytail. So I want to find a way to make sure I have that as well. His primary read is usually his sword, his bushy ponytail, usually his very wide pants, and sometimes his large shoulder pauldron. I might not be able to depict this shoulder pauldron in this pose I'm going for, but I'm hitting all the notes. So what I'm doing right now is I'm just kind of scribbling down a lot of motion in the lines. I really want to find a way to illustrate wind in a still image, trying to get that whirlwind feeling from Yasuo. The idea I have for this as a like high tier trading card where they would be able to treat different elements of the image with different, like foil treatments or the physical feel of it, the finish, like it could be matte or more glossy. We can add elements to make it feel a bit like more premium. So I'm trying to find elements that would lend well to this kind of treatment. So what I'm thinking is like finding like those swirling wind lines to give it a lot of dynamism. So after I've scribbled my basic composition onto the page, I try to go back and clean it up slowly. I'm still trying to find a lot of the specifics as I'm drawing, and it's kind of a process of discovery for me as well. I just kind of have a general idea of what I want, and as I put marks down on the page, I'm kind of solidifying my options and seeing what's working and what's not. And I'll just continue doing that until I feel like I have a pretty good base to continue from. So right now I'm kind of combining two steps. Normally I would do a few of these rough sketches and present them as options, but just for the sake of time, I'm just moving from refining the sketch more for illustration, just because I'm not going to have the time to do multiple sketches to share. But normally I would do a number of sketches and we would kind of go back and forth and figure out what's the best composition. Here I'll just go with my first composition just for the sake of time. It's very tempting to go into rendering in detail as soon as possible because that's the part that looks pretty and it can be fun and relaxing. This portion where you're coming up with the composition is a lot of trial and error and trying to figure out what's working, what's not. It could be sometimes frustrating if you can't figure it out, but ultimately it's incredibly important because like no matter how well you draw or render something, if the composition isn't working great, it's not going to be the best illustration it could be. And what do I mean when I say a good composition? Composition is basically the combination of how you lay out all the elements in your image, so the character, the background, the special effects. It also takes into consideration the values and colors and how all that stuff works together. Basically, anything you put into your image is part of the composition, including the UI of the card affects the composition. It's a lot of things that you're constantly thinking about as you're putting marks to paper. So right now I'm trying to find like a good vibe that's, has the cool like samurai pose for Yasuo, but it's also, I'm making it a little bit more ridiculous with the fly fishing elements. So it's this juxtaposition of cool and offbeat that I think could be fun. Like, what if instead of like the classic Ronin hat, he has like a fly fishing hat? So usually when you're doing illustration for trading card games or for anything really, there's a much more of a collaboration with art directors. I would usually do a sketch similar to I'm doing right now, but I would do a few of them and present them to the art director. And the art director would usually pick one, give any feedback they have, and it would be a back and forth process. This is true for basically any professional art assignments, whether it's trading card games, concept art, illustrations for books or video games, movies, TV, you name it. There's a back and forth of presenting ideas and feedback from the team. Usually there's a lot of guides that you go by to make sure that the artwork feels cohesive with all the other artwork in the product. What's really cool about these Riftbound cards is for the really rare, unique artist cards, we're kind of encouraged to break that mold and create something more in our own style or our own take so that it is like purposefully different than the normal cards, which is a lot of freedom that you don't always get. And it'll probably lead to a big variety of unique cards as different artists put their own personal spin on stuff and don't necessarily need to adhere to the strict guidelines that are usually in place for maintaining a cohesive IP. Okay, so at this point I have like a really rough idea of like the pose I want Yasuo to be in for his fishing. And from here, usually I might clean it up more, but for sake of time, I'm probably going to just start the painting process. The first thing I do with this is I try to make it more solid so that we can really start building the forms and carving them out. I feel like there's a lot as a starting artist that you kind of learn about working on a project that's bigger than just your own art. As a starting artist, you're mainly concerned with your craft of, can I make this a really cool image and does it both look good in a craft standpoint? Like did I draw it well? Did I paint it well? Like, ooh, can I like depict this kind of material in a cool way that I've never been able to do before? And there's a lot of growing and learning that can be really fun and just developing those fundamental skills. But once you start working with either clients or with a team on where your art is being used to contribute to a larger project, you actually start to learn about how that artwork fits within something larger than just the artwork itself. So for example, if you're doing trading card games, you're just one piece of art out of all of the set of trading cards. And I'll use these artist cards as an example. Like when you look at multiple of these cards side by side, they all look wildly different, which can be kind of jarring compared to like the normal cards that are all kind of more cohesive. But what that does is it creates like a very unique specialness to each card that isn't, it's not similar to any of the other cards. Beyond just its actual rarity, it's just like the style is different, the vibe is different, and it just gives it a uniqueness that when everything is more cohesive, it's no longer like that. So that's just for these cards in general. But there's also, for any kind of project, there's unique considerations for that project that you possibly won't consider until you're working with other people or with a team. So generally when I'm working on a character, I like to create a layer that just has the character on it, like it's a full silhouette. I can adjust it later, but this is just an easy way to quickly mask out the character and work within its bounds just for expediency. So now that I have the character's silhouette kind of carved out roughly, I can do stuff like airbrush and color within its boundaries without worrying about going outside the lines. And then later on, I can go outside the lines if I need to. I like to separate working with value and working with color sometimes. Some people are able to do both at the same time, but generally for me, I like to separate those two things just to simplify the process for myself. What I mean by that is I like to kind of define form in black and white and then go back and add color to it and not do those things simultaneously. So right now what I'm doing is I'm adding a little bit of form to the drawing I've made just really quickly. You can see now that I had the silhouette clipped, I can just paint within his silhouette without worrying about staying inside the lines. So I think a lot of artists start out by using this kind of soft airbrush as it's a really easy way to establish like gradation and general shading in a piece. But at a certain point, I think it's good to move away from this because it always makes everything look super soft. At a certain point, you want to make sure that your artwork is feeling a little bit more deliberate and less soft. So you can go with sharper brushes, or like right now I'm using something that's kind of flat. So you can chisel out planes in your artwork. And what I'm trying to do here is establish like a sense of lighting. I'm imagining if he's fly fishing, or if he's fishing, the light's probably coming from the sky or the sun above, or maybe a combination of both. So I'm starting to think about the lighting in those kind of terms of, oh, there's probably a top-down light coming from the sky, as well as possibly a directional light coming from the sun if we decide to have that. As a kid, I was super into video games, comics, cartoons, movies. I think some of the big ones that were really influential to me, I really liked the Final Fantasy series growing up. My first one was Final Fantasy 3 or 6, depending on where you ask. It was 3 in America, but I think it was actually Final Fantasy 6. That was a huge influence for me. That made me fall in love with video games and RPGs. Just any IP, I think, that had like a rich IP where I could really like lose myself in the world building and the characters and things like that. I feel super fortunate that I get to help building an IP for a living. It would be crazy if kid me knew that I could contribute to building an IP as well for my life's work. I feel like in my early career, I was just super excited to be able to do art, to work on video games and trading card games and stuff like that, and also do my own artwork. I did have to be careful. I feel like at a certain point I was saying yes to everything and taking on as many projects as I could, and I found myself working like all the time, like doing artwork, till my wrists hurt and sun up, sundown. And I didn't realize I was actually burning myself out because I didn't even give myself the time to even think about that. Nowadays, I try to take a much more healthy approach, making sure I, balance the amount of work I'm doing, not being afraid to say no when there's too much on my plate, making sure I have time for life and to recover and to recuperate. Because, if you burn out from overworking and stuff like that, even if you're proud of how much you're getting done, you're not doing your best work. And sometimes too, like taking a break, it gives you time to think about the stuff you're working on in a much deeper capacity. When you actually come back to your paintings or your concepts or the things you're working on, sometimes it's actually the time you took off, you kind of solved a lot of the problems you're trying to solve in your head, and you're not trying to spend as much time in front of the artwork trying to solve it. So sometimes it can even be beneficial. I think art plays a really important role in trading card games. A trading card game could technically exist without any art. Like you're just using the rules to play the game. But with the art, suddenly these collections of rules and numbers and effects are given this fantasy that these are actually people or creatures or magical spells or things that you're doing. And the art, much like graphics in a video game or something, like the art in a trading card game like transports the player into something fantastical. Instead of just battling it out with math, you're actually you're fighting with your warriors, you're killing monsters, you're casting spells, and all of this is done through art or maybe flavor text. it allows you as a player to imagine epic battles in your mind's eye while you're playing the trading card game. I remember playing like Magic the Gathering, and I would do terrible at the game because I have a very active mind's eye, and I would build my decks based on what I thought would be cool, like my entire elf deck, or like like my demon army or undead army, but like it wasn't always the most optimal. But I was having a lot of fun because it was like very immersive to me to build my deck those ways. But it just really highlights how the art in those cards really can transport the player into the universe of the card game. And I'm hoping that the Riftbound cards will do the same. I've been working at Riot for over 10 years, probably 12 years plus now. And I remember it was a complete culture shock when I came here, just because I immediately saw that everyone I was working with, no matter what they were doing on a project, everyone was incredibly passionate about the stuff we were doing. And more often than not, we would keep trying to do stuff that we thought was cool, and we would keep making more work for ourselves because we thought it would be even cooler if we did it this way. And then they're like, oh, we bit off way more than we can chew. Next time we gotta like make sure we're aware of what we're signing up on to do so that we can not bite off more than we can chew. But every time, we would start doing something and we're like, yeah, we could do it much cooler though. And we would end up like increasing our scope again. But it was really cool to be in a place where everyone was just really excited about the work we were doing and always wanted to like impress and put out the best version of it. I feel like if ever there was any arguments or any misalignment, it was because people had multiple ideas of what they thought the best way to do it was. So the problem was that people thought we could do it cooler in multiple different ways. Just that kind of passion in the environment was, it's really amazing to me, and it makes me excited to work with these folks. And I've been here for over a decade, if that says anything. As an artist, I feel like I'm constantly learning and trying to improve my abilities. There's so many talented artists out there now. There were always a lot of talented artists, but for some reason I feel like there's even more talented artists out there. It's probably just social media allows you to see, everybody. So it's really easy to be overwhelmed, and I'm often the imposter syndrome kicks in, and I can't believe I'm the one working on this stuff when there's so many talented people that could be doing this better. I feel like any project I get to work on, I'm just like humbled by the amount of talent that I'm working alongside of, and I just try to do my best, learn from the folks around me. For me, that sense of like being a new artist never really goes away. I always feel like I have so much more to learn from everybody. And honestly, I think that's the key to not just art, but anything really, just having that curiosity and that willingness to learn from those around you, and never really thinking you have all the answers. Like experience brings you wisdom, and you can use that to get you far. But I think the greater wisdom is that you don't know anything or that you don't know most things. Approaching problems in life with curiosity and openness and humbleness, and trying to constantly learn and challenge yourself, I think is key to growth, and never really thinking you have all the answers, or because you've done something before that everything should be done that way. Even now as I'm working, I'll be honest, the imposter syndrome is kicking in, and I'm like, oh, I hope I can make this look decent by the time I'm done. But I feel like this is a normal feeling for a lot of artists when you hit that mode. I feel like I hit this mode in a lot of artwork I do, where I have an idea and I start working on it, and it's not quite hitting the idea in my head. I forget where I saw it. I think there's like a graph that shows like, oh, you're here, and then you start working on it, and then you start falling into this area. I think it's like the valley of despair or something, where nothing's coming out the way you want, and then you slowly work your way out of it until you get to a result that semi-happy with. I think as an artist, a lot of times never truly happy with the result. It could always be better, but that also I believe is a good way of, you know, really pushing yourself and challenging yourself for the next piece to take it to another level. So my normal process of creating art, I'm doing a very truncated version of it here. The first thing after research is usually my scribble phase, where I was kind of scribbling the composition out on the page. Normally, I would do a number of these. I don't even share them most of the time. My initial composition will probably be trash, but there's probably like some kind of nugget of learning I get from there. I'm trying to find like interesting shapes and motion and tell a story, but also show off the character in a cool dynamic way. You know, like here it's like, oh, I want him to look like he's fishing. I also want him to look like, you know, a swordsman. I want to show off his costume. I want this like mysterious kind of set my hidden face. I want to show off wind. You know, like I have a lot of goals I want to do in the image, and juggling all that can be a lot sometimes. And it's a still image, and I want to say a lot of things with it. So I need to kind of figure out what are the focal points and what are like the primary, secondary, tertiary reads of the image. Like where does a person's eye go to when they look at this image, and where can I lead it? So I'm like using very purposeful swooping lines and making your eye kind of move around the image, and I'll hopefully have time to add a little things here and there that can make use of your eye moving around the image to further tell the story of the image. So from having this loose value structure, I can explore color much quicker. I can add like a layer. I'm clipping this new layer onto, this is Yasuo's silhouette. Here's a new layer. For me, I'm using a overlay layer. This is just one method. Other people might have other methods. They can use multiply layers or color layers. But what the overlay layer basically does is it creates kind of a transparent layer that you can affect. So for example, you know, for skin, I can find like a vaguely skin color, and then when I put it on the overlay layer, it's kind of transparently affecting that layer in a way that allows me to maintain the values. That's not the right color I want, but I can kind of play around until I find like a color that I'm happy with. So here I'm actually staying with like Yasuo's kind of general color palette, like base Yasuo. Usually if this was like a real like a skin or something, we would actually go with a different palette, different hair colors and things like that, because just to differentiate it from the base look of Yasuo. But this isn't technically a skin. This is just like Yasuo in a wind fishing, fly fishing. So I'm just actually staying closer to Yasuo. Yeah, this is weekend Yasuo. This is canon. This is canon. This is what Yasuo does when he's not fighting. Yeah, I don't know if you even want to pop up with this is not canon. All these lines from the fishing line will create like a lot of flow and movement in the image. Normally I'd probably spend a lot of time trying to find really good lines here, but I'm just gonna try to commit to a couple just for time. He's basically Ionia's version of a dynamite fisherman. Yeah, I feel like if you were to go fishing in like any other region, the fish probably eats you. So now I'm just using these fish as like a visual element to add even more movement and like color pops to the image to make it more interesting. Especially when you take into account for these Riftbound cards. Again, this isn't a real card, but if it were a real card, they could treat all these different elements differently on the physical card. So like For example, the fish could be more glossy, so it would feel wet or something. Or maybe the scales might be foil treated so that they have a shimmer to them, or a combination, or maybe even a texture to them, so it feels like actual scale. And then maybe the fishing line has the high gloss. Like all the elements can have like a different finish, which would make it feel super premium. So now that I've introduced color to the composition, I have to rebalance everything again because different colors draw the eye more than others. And so even though I was trying to be balanced with value, now I have to rebalance keeping the color in mind. And usually this is an ongoing process throughout the entire creation of the image. It's very common for me to be kind of actually unhappy with the colors and rendering of the image for a long time because the balance isn't there yet and I haven't found it. And really, when you think about it, I'm not going to find it until I'm done, because that's why I'm done. It's because I've found the balance on everything. So, if you're working on your own images and you're finding you're stuck in a zone where you're kind of not happy with how everything's coming together, it doesn't necessarily mean the image is bad. It might just not be done. That's not to say that every image is going to be a winner. There's always going to be images that work better than others. And that's okay too. It's also a learning situation. But even those images that didn't quite make it were still a good learning opportunity for me, because, if something doesn't work, why doesn't it work? There's many images I've done that I've chosen to forget about and never see the light of day just because I never quite found that correct balance in the composition. No image is wasted. You can always learn from a failed image. And even images that eventually turn out okay, like, there's a large part of that process where it could be a struggle and you're not quite sure if you can pull it through. I think it's just all part of the process. I think for anyone interested in art, either professionally or as like a hobby, I think the best advice I have to give is to stay curious. I know that's what drove me through my learning. I always wanted to make stuff, and I was always exploring new ways to do it. I was really interested in digital painting and 3D and how people made what they made. And there's so many resources, especially now. You can learn any program from online. Expect setbacks, expect it to be hard when I'm working. Like a lot of times it doesn't pan out the way I imagine, or it takes a while for it to come together. And that's just like a normal part of the process. It's been that way, since the beginning, for me anyway. Like, every painting I've done was on some level a struggle. And each struggle you learn something new. And as long as you're not disheartened by the struggle or the setbacks or, images not coming out quite how you expected, you're probably learning something every time. And incrementally, you start building up skill sets. And as you build up the skill sets, you can take your art further and further and further each time. Sometimes it can backtrack. Sometimes you'll do something you're like, oh, that's not even nearly as good as I did last time. But that's okay. You're still learning stuff. And maybe there was something the previous time that was a success, but you don't fully understand what you did yet. And that's fine. Like, I think a lot of building, like in any skill set really, it's just through repetition and practice, and art's the same way. But I think a big part of it is just that curiosity and that willing to try and fail and problem solve and experiment. And I think that's really what makes art fun. And there's really no one true way to do it either. I feel like every time I do a piece, I might have certain methodologies I like to employ, but each one I do slightly different, just because why not? Like it keeps things fresh. Maybe I'll learn something new. Maybe I'll find a better way. Maybe not. Just staying curious and, having fun with it, even when it gets tough. I feel like it's also very important for professional artists to be good at taking feedback that you may or may not agree with, because the feedback you're receiving is from people trying to solve different problems than yourself. And sometimes their solution might be counter to what you think would be great for the image. But because you're working in a team setting on a project that goes beyond just your own one image, you have to account for what that image represents and serves in the greater whole, and how you can address the needs of everyone else on the team, because it's a team, and all those parts are important, and you need to, as the artist on the team, it's your job to figure out how to fulfill all those different needs through your artwork. I feel like artists who have a hard time hearing feedback or accepting feedback openly and with curiosity can have a hard time working in a professional setting, because it's all about iteration and addressing feedback and adjusting your artwork for the needs of the project and the team. It's a much different experience than doing artwork purely for yourself, where it's just an exercise in the craft, and really it could be whatever you want it to be. You just want it to look good usually when you're doing artwork for yourself. But once you're doing it for a project or a team, looking good is just like, it's not even the primary focus. The primary focus is to solve whatever you're trying to create with the artwork, and making it look good is the cherry on top. I mean, everyone wants it to look good, but it first has to meet all of the needs of the project you're working on. I find that a lot of the folks I'm working with are actually very passionate about what we're doing. Even when we keep switching, between new projects and stuff, like, they're always passionate, and it's, like, how do you keep up that passion? I know one time Christian, who's working on Arcane, was telling us that he has to find a personal connection with the things that he's working on, because by building that personal connection to the piece, you can tell whether it's good or not, because you can feel it, because it's a personal expression. So as an artist, I try to find my personal connection with all the pieces I'm working on, and it could be all kinds of subject matter, anything from like horror images with like Pike to like K-pop stuff with like KDA and things like that. And they're like incredibly vastly different genres within our general IP. But every time I try to find a personal connection to what I'm working on. That takes a lot of like research and openness, finding what you like about different subject matters, especially on the fly. If you can't find that personal connection to the work you're doing, then the passion's probably not there. And then if the passion's not there, then the work quickly becomes a chore, as opposed to a passion project or something you're having fun with. And that could be a very fast route to burnout. I remember before working here, I had this illustration I had to do for a client, and it involved a lot of painting of grass. And I was just painting grass for days, like individual blades of grass in this field. And it actually messed up my wrist, because I had to keep doing that repetitive motion. And I did not find my personal connection or joy with grass. And that was a rough one. Yeah, it's important to find your personal connection with the work you're doing. It could be all kinds of stuff. Like, it could be finding pride in, like, even if it's a subject matter that you're not normally used to or you're new to. Like, part of it could be just finding pride in learning about new things and exploring, discovering new subject matters. Sometimes it's like you can be the most amazing painter or draftsman, but if you're trying to work professionally and your mindset isn't centered around the project, it could actually become very painful for both you and the team if you're not approaching everything with a similar philosophy or goals. Because, an artiste might create amazing art. If it's not aligned with what the project's trying to be, then that usefulness of that art for the project isn't there. And at the same time, all the feedback that artiste is getting from the team probably is very painful for them, because it is something that they feel is making the artwork worse and doesn't make sense to them. Really what it is a gap in goals and mindset. Whereas if everyone's working towards the same goals, then generally you would imagine that there's much less friction. And even if there is, it's at least with the understanding that everyone has the same goals and maybe just different ideas about how to achieve it. But I feel that working with folks that have similar goals and are very good about transparently communicating those goals, it's a much smoother experience, and it's just much more. There's much more trust and much more creative collaboration and just that feeling of being surrounded by passionate people, which I think is actually incredibly important. And I don't think that's something people think about in their early careers. You just want to be able to do art, but then as you keep going, there's more nuance to the career and what you can get out of it. Back during League of Legends 10th anniversary, L10, I did a streaming episode while we were celebrating League where I did a similar thing where I can't remember if I also picked it from a hat at that point, but I picked KDA Gragas, and I had to do a live painting of Gragas as if he was in KDA, which was ridiculous and a lot of fun, which they actually turned into a real skin, I believe. It was like a April Fool's kind of skin. Seeing that come to life was unexpected. So at this point, I'm pretty happy with the general composition. I can kind of keep adding more details and rendering things out. So I'm going to do that to kind of bring more life into the image. So maybe this is a good time for me to flesh out the fish a little bit more. Early on in my study of art and illustration, I did a lot of observation drawing. So sometimes that took place in classrooms, so like live figure drawing, or sometimes it was out in the wild. So like I used to carry a sketchbook with me, and I would take the subway to work every day, or to school even, and I would sketch folks on the train, or if I was taking a flight, I would sketch people waiting around for flights and things like that. There's certain things I kind of look at when I see portfolios. For me, when I'm looking for visual development artists, concept artists, I want to see how this person is thinking. When I see sketches and breakouts of ideas and explanations of ideas with illustrations and like really thought out creative world building and stuff I've either never seen before or not quite in this way, and not just weird, but thought out, that stands out to me. Communication is actually incredibly important in a team dynamic. I don't think a lot of artists immediately think about their communication skills as one of their major skills when it comes to creating artwork for video games, animation. But when you're working in a team, being able to communicate is hugely important. And it's also a factor that people take in beyond just your portfolio. Like if you imagine two people apply for a position and they both have amazing portfolios, but one is just much more communicative and able to communicate what their intentions are and take feedback and question that feedback, that's a huge plus. So that's actually a skill that some people don't realize that they need to develop, because it's not immediately something you think about when you think about doing art, and it's not immediately what people showcase in their art. But it's hugely important when you're working in teams. I think a fun exercise if you're a student or you're training yourself to be a visual development artist or a concept artist, this is what I did when I taught students, or also back in school I did this as well, is take an established story, or you can create your own story if you have that desire. But if you don't really care about creating your own story, but you want to show off your visual development and concept art skills, take an established story and then change the genre and the medium. And don't just do one piece, like actually flesh out that world of like all those characters, those locations, maybe some keyframes of moments, things like that, to show that you can really visualize a whole world and story. And you can gear that kind of exercise towards what if, like the game Lies of P is kind of like, what if Pinocchio was a Soulsborne game? You can kind of do that kind of exercise to kind of build a portfolio towards what you want to do. It's good to be a fan of a lot of stuff and exposing yourself to a lot of medium, especially if it's overlapping interests. Even if it's not overlapping, really. Like if you want to make a splash in an industry, if you want to make the next cool game or animation, it's probably even not going to be completely inspired by what came before it. It's going to be inspired by something totally removed, because that way you're bringing in fresh ideas instead of just, you know, doing your take on something that has already been done. That's where new innovations come from, is from something outside of the pool. So like being a fan of a lot of different stuff helps broaden your interests and makes you feel passionate about a lot of different things, and you can bring that passion into what you do. And sometimes it's a separate passion that's unrelated to what you're working on, but when you bring that in, you're bringing in fresh passion, fresh ideas and interpretations of the world that you never know could be incredibly resonant to a lot of people without them even realizing it. I think of the story of like, I think it was Squaresoft. Before they made Final Fantasy, I believe they made like a baseball game or something like that, but the company was going under and they only had enough money, I believe, for one more project, and the game director wanted to do a Dungeons and Dragons type fantasy adventure, and he called it Final Fantasy because it was their final project. But because he brought all that passion in, he created this whole IP that went down and changed the genre forever. So right now I'm jumping around the image and I'm adding these detail touches. You know, I'm adding the details to the rope, some little details to the vest and trinkets. Whenever I'm adding these details, what I'm trying to do is bring a sense of feeling and tangibility. So like the rope, I want those knotted cords to feel like you could touch them and the rope feels heavy. And for these hooks and straps and things, I want them to be flying around. And because they're all flying around, I want you to feel the wind. So all these elements, I'm trying to add a little touch that gives it a tactile feel so that you're a little bit more immersed in the image. Like any one of these things is not really well painted. When I go close up, it's just kind of scribbly. Here, I'll go close. It's just scribbles. But, you know, when it all kind of adds up together, it adds up to more of an overall effect that I'm trying to convey. So there's a lot of times where I'm working on a piece and it doesn't quite feel like it's coming together the way I want. And there's multiple ways to deal with those situations. Like for this piece, there's a lot of times where I wasn't sure if it was working out, and I have to keep analyzing why is it not working? Is it the composition? Is the drawing bad? If it's the composition, like what part of the composition? Is it the colors? Is it the shape? Is it the flow? And I'm constantly asking myself these questions as I continue and readjusting the image as I go. You know, slowly, as I chip away at those problems, you know, addressing one issue creates another. So it's this ongoing process of troubleshooting the image and figuring out why it's not quite what I imagine. You know, it's a constant process until either I run out of time or I'm happy with what the result is. And usually the answer is I've run out of time. But hopefully through that process, I've gotten it to a place that works much better than where it was. And hopefully to a place that I'm satisfied with it. I want to add a little bit of a pattern or something in the background to give it that real card feel. A lot of the cards have a pattern in the background. I'm thinking of doing something that's reminiscent of Yasuo shapes, but I want to make sure I can do it in a way that doesn't break the composition more. So let's see, we'll just try it, and then if it doesn't work, we'll remove it. Yeah, something like that. So there's our windfisher. Coming soon to Riftbound. Yeah. So to recap, what we did was we started with a random brief. From there, I got together some references to inspire the image. Once I had the references and inspiration, I put together a sketch to find the general composition that would work along with the template of the Riftbound card. Once we had the sketch, I started to lay down some values and start sculpting out the forms of the character. After sculpting out the forms in grayscale, I added a color pass to try to find all the local colors and find where I would want some pop colors and rebalance the composition again once I had colors in the image. After we did that, I went back in and started adding more details, rendering out things, and bringing some final touches into the image, even with this short time frame. These are similar steps to what I would do in a longer time frame painting, just condensed into a quick exercise. So I would usually spend probably a day or so at least on each of these steps, just to make sure I have it down solid and move forward with confidence. But hopefully watching all these steps in a short condensed amount of time, you can kind of get a sense of the thought process and the ways to approach not just trading card illustration, but illustration in general. Just kind of tailor the thinking to whatever problem you're trying to problem solve with your art. So that's it for this episode of Super Art Power Hour. Hopefully you've learned something cool here that you can use to upgrade your art from good to super. And hopefully you look forward to our next episode. Also remember, don't go fishing for this card in Riftbound packs, because this is not a real Riftbound card, but just to illustrate the process I went through to create card art. Okay.